On the call, we are running the webinar version of Zoom instead of web meeting. So we've got the attendees muted. You won't be able to talk. We won't be able to see you, but we do have questions and answered enabled. So you'll be able to click on the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen and type in a question, and we'll be monitoring those throughout the call.
Great. Okay, recording has started. Go ahead, Sean, and kick us off.
Okay, well, everybody, thanks for joining us. We wanted to have a panel discussion today about job searching in troubled times. This discussion is being hosted by Society for Information Management, the Denver chapter. So I wanted to give Amy Beth a few moments to talk to us about what that means.
Great, thanks, John. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I wanted to just take a minute to talk a little bit about Society Information Management and the Members in Transition Group. For those of you who are not familiar, Society for Information Management is a national organization that brings together leaders to really share, network, and give back to their communities. It's really focused on IT leadership of organizations all across the United States. It's a national organization. One of the spin-off groups of SIM in the Denver chapter is our Members in Transition Group, which we often call MIT, which is one of the subcommittees that John Seville and myself chair. This group focuses on IT leadership executives that are looking for a change in their career, whether they're currently in a role or they're looking for a change in their career. We normally meet monthly, but things with COVID in the world have created some change. And so we have not been as active in meeting monthly. And so we've decided to put together a virtual event, and this is our first go at doing a virtual event. So thank you for joining us today at that. Currently, our way that we communicate with our group is through a private Facebook group. I've decided that I'd like to transition us to a Slack group, which is a common tool that a lot of IT organizations use to communicate. So I'm going to be going through the process of transitioning us to a Slack group here soon. If you're interested in getting involved with SIM in general, please let me know. If you're interested in getting involved with SIM MIT, I'd love to get your information. And if so, I've shared a link just to a quick Google form in the chat feature of the Q&A section that just asks a couple basic questions: your name, your contact information, and your name and your email, basically, and just a couple optional questions. And asking if you want any additional information. So that is in the chat feature. There's a quick link there if you want to fill that out, and I can follow up with you and get you involved in how we communicate with everybody. So feel free to fill that out if you're interested in getting involved with our SIM MIT group and our future events. So thank you for joining us today. And I hope that you guys get some value out of this. And really our intent is to help others. And thanks for joining us for this free event. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy Beth. So when the lockdown started, Amy Beth and I were talking about how could we help some of our IT peers. We were seeing a lot of people posting on Facebook or LinkedIn that they had just been laid off. And so we said, hey, we've done a lot of these training sessions around networking. Do we just rehash that again and just repeat that for everybody? And we started talking about how the job search process could be affected by this. You know, we watched unemployment in Denver go from 2% to 18% almost overnight, and started wondering what that would mean for the job searcher. You know, for years we've been telling job searchers to network, and that you should try to find a job through the network process and not be cold applying to jobs online, that you were a sucker if you did that. And it feels like that may have changed. So that got us thinking about this panel discussion. So we've got three experts in the field here. We've got Christy Nordman. She's the owner of North Consulting. Christy has been involved with, I think, 9 different startups in the Denver area now.
Yep.
When it comes to networking, Christy definitely, she lives and breathes networking and helping people out. And she's very passionate about connecting people and being a connector in town. So we wanted her to represent kind of that networking side. But she's also been a HR executive. She's established recruiting within companies, so she understands that as well. We also have Elias Cobb. Elias is a director of recruiting at Quanix. He's been an agency recruiter for at least 20 years. I know I met Elias when I was looking for a job something like 15 years ago, and he stayed in touch with me ever since. So it's been a great relationship. So I think Elias brings that expertise around what recruiters are looking for. And then we've got Neil Patwarden. He is the owner. I think he's nodding his head because I didn't screw his name up too badly. He is the owner and founder of Combio, which is a recruiting platform tool. We had kind of a pre-call yesterday, and it became apparent early on that this is kind of going to be the Neil show today. He's just got a lot of information about how ATS systems have changed over the years. And it's funny because as we talk about ATS systems, I hear people telling one another a lot of outdated information about ATS systems and how to apply for a job through the website, through an ATS system, and how it's all about keywords. And, I'd like to give Neil a few moments to speak now about how that's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you for having me. So as we talk about just applicant tracking systems in general, right, in that world, for the last 15 plus years, in sort of there hasn't been a ton of innovation from a technology perspective in that world, right? So if you think about what an ATS really is, at a very base level, it's a workflow tool. It's a vetting tool. It's taking resumes coming in from online. It's running some sort of an algorithm that will allow you to kind of glean at least a few quality candidates. And then it's either advancing them through the funnel to a hire or declining them. It's really, that's at the very basis, that's what an ATS performs. However, you're now getting various different flavors and shades. There's actually 75 different ATSs out there, all the way from the big guys to the smaller ones. But in general, they're all similar. The challenge now, and specifically now after, during COVID and post-COVID, right? The world that we live in is never going to be the same. The way you apply online is never going to be the same. Competition was already fierce, pre-COVID, when you were averaging about 250 resumes per corporate post submitted into an ATS in the United States in 2019. That number is projected to be 10x this year, and it may even go 20x depending on the vertical and type of job. So as IT leaders or as senior leaders in the IT field and as you're looking for your next career, I think it's important for you to understand that the higher you move up, it's very pyramidal, right? It's those roles are few and scarce, and I think 65% of the time, those roles don't even hit an ATS unless it's legally required. And so I would kind of partition this conversation into 2 parts. One, jobs that are publicly available on the job boards, advertised on the company's ATS, our careers page, and we can talk about that here in a second. And then the ones that are not, where the Christies, the Eliases come in, where you've got to network underground and get in front of the right people and get the ball rolling, more so than before. But one thing I will leave you with, and we'll jump back into the group, is that technology as a whole in the world of HR is changing and will change very rapidly, given this reset that we're going through with COVID-19, to adapt to kind of the new view of following quality versus quantity.
Great, thanks, Neil. So our first question as we jump in here is for all 3 of our panel members. Have you felt that the advice you give to people has changed in the last 2 months? Are you changing anything you're telling people when they come ask you how to find a job?
Yeah, I'll start off. Yeah, I think that if anything, it's a little bit more tenacity and a little bit more fire in the belly when it comes to, not only applying for roles, but just working through your network. I think that the biggest thing that, you know, the most repetitive thing I can say is just kind of ask for help, right? And ask, you know, I see on LinkedIn, you know, somebody, maybe that person knows somebody else. I think everybody, especially during this time, is more than willing to hop on a call, or, you know, a Zoom call just to try and help one another out. And I think that's the only thing that's really kind of changed with my advice is just, you know, work your network, you know, call in some favors maybe, or just, you know, branch out. Nobody is going to judge you for, you know, reaching out to people coldly and just saying, hey, I was hoping maybe you could give me 5 minutes of your time. It seems you know some really interesting people.
Yeah, go ahead, Les.
Yeah, I was going to say from I can kind of talk about maybe from a resume perspective, and not in terms of, you know, getting through an ATS screening or anything of that nature, but in terms of what recruiters look at. And a lot of the stuff that I've seen, and not even recently, even in years past when you weren't getting as many applicants or whatever, they say recruiters look at your resume for between 10 and 30 seconds maybe when they first see it. And my guess is with hundreds more applicants, it's maybe even less than that now. So the biggest advice, and I've always given this advice, but I think it's more pertinent now, is you really have to make your resume relevant to the job for which you're applying, right? You can't just have your one standard resume that you know, shuffle out for every single job that you apply for. Like, hey, here's my IT manager resume. I'm just going to use it for every job. You really have to take your resume and you have to tailor it, and you have to make sure your experience is, it's not only like technical keywords like, oh, I'm a Java developer, I need to make sure I see Java in all my jobs. It's making sure that when you're talking about management, when you're talking about budgets, when you're talking about the types of people you've led, the types of projects you've led, they have to align with what the job is asking for. And I can't tell you how many times I get resumes where the objective, right, the job, let's say it's a software development manager, right? And then the objective will be to obtain a VP of IT position. And I don't just toss it, but I think there are a lot of recruiters who do. You know, they look at that and go, well, this person doesn't really want to be a software development manager. They want to be a VP of IT. So this job probably isn't for them. I mean, and right there, you've lost people on your objective. So they didn't even look at your resume. And that's the biggest piece of advice. If there was one single piece of like resume advice that I think has changed the most, you got to really take the time to make sure it matches with what you're applying for.
Yeah, and I would second that. I think the way you address your resume has to change today, and it has to be very tailored to the point where, you know, kind of the top half of the resume has to resonate with the recruiter, or they're not going to read it, right? And so if it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to read it. So that's number one. But number two, I think it even goes beyond a resume, right? You've got to figure out how to stand out in a sea of resumes that are coming in either on a recruiting platform or to a recruiter. So I always encourage people to, well, you know, would you be comfortable going on video, right? Creating a 30-second video of yourself speaking about who you are, what you bring to a table. That's so much more than a piece of paper, right? And there are platforms to do that, including ours. Would you consider building your own website, right? And having kind of your own little, you know, I have one that says neopatwharton.com, and here's a little bit about me, and this is what it is, and this is what I've done. And especially in the IT field, it's projects I've done and what I'm interested in, or things that I've started and coded. And so it gives a nice little glimpse of who you are beyond that piece of paper, and then you can package it neatly and send it off, right? So it becomes your pitch, and you have to learn how to pitch now more so than ever, so that now as a recruiter is looking at the resume, check the boxes on what the job entails, but now can I see culture? Can I see personality? Can I see soft skills? Is this person presentable and can articulate well? And those are things at the top of funnel that are going to be very, very important to differentiate.
Yeah, you know, Neil, that's spot on. Just I remember, you know, any recruiting function I've stood up in any company, you know, any video resumes that we get would actually go to the top of our pile, just because you could automatically resonate with that person and see if that was going to be a fit or not. And frankly, I like the bravery of doing it. You know, it kind of sets everybody apart. But I would always go for the people who would do the video resumes first.
One thing that I might say is, as an IT guy, I had this experience when I was in Afghanistan. A bunch of us were getting ready to come home, and we sat around a table, and it was a resume party in the dining facility. And we had one guy at the table who was a sales professional. And the amount of impact he added to everybody else's resume as a salesperson was huge. And Neil, you just mentioned that this is kind of a sales pitch, and this is a marketing piece. And I think you've got that marketing background. So for the IT people who are on this call, I would recommend one of the best ways to network is to reach out to the marketing people and ask them if they can help you with your resume or with your approach towards job hunting. As an engineer, we're just that's so alien to us, pitching ourselves and putting that extra little spin on our resume. And it's hard to write your own resume to begin with because we all don't like to toot our own horn. So I think bringing in an external marketing or salesperson to kind of help could really make a difference in your resume.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the caveat I would add is there's no such thing as the perfect resume. There just isn't. There's not a perfect template. There's not a look and feel. They come in all shapes and sizes. And by the way, that ATS is probably going to chop it up and delete some things anyway. Sure. So my suggestion is, yes, always have someone who is a bit more visual, right, to look at your resume and make it stand out. But and this applies if you're going through the network route and trying to get through eyes quickly through email introductions or what have you. When you're going through the ATS route or just applying online, please make sure that if you use the upload resume button, you go back and check every single field in the ATS to see if it's filled out. Because 9 times out of 10, it's not. And so the important information from your resume that you would have wanted in the ATS submission actually doesn't carry over. And to a recruiter at first glance, they look at incomplete fields and they probably won't take the time to get to the resume itself. Right. And so just a little bit of just focus on ensuring that everything that you do want on your resume translated into kind of the system of an ATS. Just make sure to go back and recheck. One thing I will add, actually, this is something that a friend of mine sort of told me years ago when I was actually job hunting is you've got to be, when you're going the network route or when you're trying to get introductions or talking to people that you want to start talking relevant to roles, it can be daunting, right? Where do you start? Right? It's just where do you start? There's LinkedIn, maybe you've got 4,000 connections or 2,000 connections or 100 connections, right? But who do you talk to? So LinkedIn's got this nifty feature within your settings that allows you to download your entire first contact list by title. That's so you can actually sort through all the connections that you may want to talk to that have titles that you may want to go after. So that allows you to prioritize the people that you may want to reach out to first within LinkedIn by using your own data that you've accrued over the years. So something to think about in being a little bit more strategic in your hunting.
That's great. Thank you.
That's pretty useful. I had a quick one point and then one question for you, Neil. I think the other thing that I've gotten questions about in the past, and I don't know if anyone else has recently, is cover letters. My personal opinion as a recruiter is that they're pretty much worthless. I don't think people really read them. And certainly it's not going to hurt to write one, right? To have it in your email that you send or if there's an attachment for it. But the mistake I think people sometimes make is putting relevant information into the cover letter and not in their resume, right? They're like, oh, I'm going to attack this job in my cover letter. And then they'll see my skills, how they fit this job. And then I'm going to send my standard template resume that I send every time. And then nobody reads the cover letter in the first place. I mean, I'm not sure how often people read them. Personally, virtually never. I have too many resumes to go through most of the time. My question for you, Neil, though, is you kind of touched on it as far as the fields transferring in, but what do ATS systems, the upload resume, the apply online feature, what do they do with oddly formatted resumes, ones that have like the table on the right and then another table on the left with different information in them, or ones with the graphic designer resumes with the different logos and stuff, or even when people have all their certifications listed out with pictures of the cert rather than just saying CCNA, it's a picture of the CCNA badge. I know my ATS, when I process the resumes in, I'll just get an error back and it doesn't even process it. And for me, I'll just force upload it and attach it and create the profile. I'm not sure that corporate people, certainly if the person's applying online, they don't even know that person applied. So how does that work? Does it work? Should people avoid that?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a great question. I think it's one of the biggest reasons why resumes tend to delete things and include things, and so I think in the simplest way, without getting too technical, each ATS is and their upload capability looks off a data table, right? So it's in rows and columns, and rows and columns can be defined by the ATS in terms of what information they want to capture off a resume. So a column header could be, what's your first job title, second job title, third job title, fourth job title, right? So you've got these columns, and your rows are your years, your different stops, right, on your resume. And so the software itself usually is trained to look at rows and columns. It's not trained to look at side columns or images. And so that's where the disconnect usually happens, is you'll start to get a row that's filled out, but it missed the description, or because it was formatted a little differently, or it completely omitted a job in your resume because it was not in the right place, or it wasn't formatted correctly. And so my advice is always to keep sort of a resume, especially if you want to get through an ATS, is to really envision it as rows and columns. And how do you ensure that everything is aligned to a row or a column so that it has the best chance to be read by the algorithms that an ATS deploys, which, by the way, are not advanced, right? They're simple matching algos, which are designed to pull in data as quickly as possible. There are some advances in that world now. Word vectors are starting to become very common in terms of reading a resume well, but we're far from actually templatizing it and getting it in the right way.
Neil, to Elias's point, if you're applying through an ATS and it gives you the option to upload a cover letter, do you hurt yourself by not uploading one?
Well, I'll speak to myself. I have never done a cover letter.
Sure.
Ever. And it just does, and I'm from marketing, and I would think that I would need an extra piece of information to advertise myself, right? So what I have found, at least in my interviews with HR leaders and talent acquisition before we started Cambio, is if they spend a cursory 8 to 10 seconds scanning the top of your resume and are attracted enough, they'll read. If they're not, you're put away into this pile for maybe to come back to later. But what I have started doing, and what I've had my teams in the past also do, is instead of a cover letter, upload a journey map. And I have a template that I can share with everybody here after the call as well. But it's a journey map is interesting, where it's essentially an infographic about yourself, or where you started and how you kind of wandered your way to where you are and where you're applying. But it's a amazingly powerful visual to showcase who you are. It's insanely attractive for someone to look at it and like, oh, this is really cool. Let me look at this person's resume. And so you've gone very quickly from just being a nobody to, I want to see who this person is. And then let's see what the next step might be. So journey maps, I think, will become more common as a PDF upload with your resume as a package.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to a next question here, and we've hit on it a little bit. Neil, a lot of the advice for networking job hunts over the last couple of years has been to write a resume that's a narrative of what you've done. And a lot of that narrative is around problems that you've solved for companies or accomplishments that you've done at a company, with the intention being that that's being handed to an actual person. And they're going to read that and say, oh, wow, this is the same problem I'm facing at my company. Let me hire this guy and see how, or let me interview this guy and see how he solved this problem. A lot of times that problem statement isn't in the job description. You have to know somebody and say what problem are you actually trying to solve with this position? And that doesn't come across in the job description. And so obviously that's not in the ATS. So, you know, we've all gotten the advice around ATS of just basically copy the job description back to the ATS and just keywords and so on and so forth. But now if we've got 2,000 people applying for the job and copying the job description back, is there anything that you can do to stand out, yet at the same time feeding the keywords back to the system?
I think in a system that's designed to filter via keywords, you're going to need to have keywords. I think that's not going to go away anytime soon. So you're going to need to look at the job description cleanly. And by the way, job description is an entire different set of problems. Most of them are cookie cutter. Very rarely is optimization of job descriptions, especially at a corporate level. But having said that, yes, I mean, I think you're going to need the keywords piece to be part of your resume. I think that's going to be important. The other piece I would say is especially from an IT perspective, is if you can quantify as much as you can in your jobs, more data the better. Right? Did you deliver an optimization from X to Y? You had cost savings from Y to Z because you pulled in. You simplified a stack from X to Y. Whatever it is, as much data as you can pack in that you have done and you have delivered, that is far more attractive now than sort of a single line that says, well, I led the X team and this is what we did. So my advice would be to really look at your resume and see if you could quantify as many statements as you can.
Okay. Elias, Christy, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's just so well said, Neil. In looking at, there's a couple things I wanted to add. First and foremost, there's a lot of research on heat mapping on how people actually look at resumes. It's on Google. Just look up resume heat mapping. But you can see where a recruiter's eyes will actually pan over the resume and what they're looking for. We play in the recruiting world, we play a game called Buzzword Bingo, right? But in the IT space specifically, Neil's right. The more, even more redundancy, but the more buzzwords, more keywords that you can add to your resume is going to be really, really important. Adding keywords, that's great, but it doesn't tell me that you know how you impacted the business from a financial perspective or from an operational perspective. And so while it's great to know that you've done all these projects and stuff, Neil's right. Like, I need to know how you moved things forward, or maybe how you peeled things off the ceiling, how you changed, how you changed the entire pathway of a project. That's what I'm looking for in resumes. I'm looking for the knowledge of how you as an individual contributor or leader impact the company.
So can you have kind of a blended resume? Can you have a bullet or two that's very much a problem-solving statement, or a money-saving or revenue-generating statement?
That's perfect. Make it a sub-bullet. So, led XXX initiative for X team, and this is what I accomplished, right? But, I think it's worth even, removing a line of fluff just to say, like, here's what the revenue was after I accomplished this project, or here's the traffic I saw. It's just huge at any level of your career.
I think with if you're engineer level, say in the in the weeds, you have to have the technical keywords all over your resume. I mean, I can't tell you how many candidates we've had rejected by hiring managers, who clearly have the skills, and talk about what they've done, but they didn't mention Ruby on Rails or Java or whatever it was in the one job, and got kicked back. I think at the management level, it's equally important for some of the things like Neil was talking about. If you still have ATSs that are doing keyword match algorithms, but it's more important to have the qualitative information, like what budget. Instead of saying led a team of developers, well, how many developers? What were those developers doing? What were the skills they were using? I think those the numbers are what people like to see, especially when you're being hired as a leader. Upper management specifically wants to know, how are you going to save me money, make me money, or make my life easier? Like, right? Aren't those basically the three questions that your boss wants to know about you, generally speaking? So your resume needs to say how you're going to do those things, or how you've done them in the past. And I think one of the a good way, like Christy was saying, to bullet point wise, if you're struggling with how to customize your resume for every job, I've seen people do selected accomplishments, and that works really well. You can do it per job, just 3 or 4 bullet points, 2 or 3 bullet points of key achievements that you made. And each time you can change those to be relevant to the job for which you're applying, right? So you don't have to change your entire resume every single time. You can just change a section. And like Christy was saying, swap in a couple bullet points here and there to really attack what you need to say.
Great, thank you. Christy, I got one for you. We've talked about networking a lot, especially it seems with IT people. There's a lot of IT people who struggle with networking. And what I've heard from people now as they're looking for jobs is, man, I have sucked at networking for the last couple of years. I haven't reached out. I haven't helped anybody. I haven't done anything. I don't feel like I can go to my network and ask for help now. Do you have any suggestions for
Yeah,
that?
back to my earlier point at the beginning of this call, like now is the time to start to cut your teeth on that. But I think that people see you in a little bit more vulnerable way right now as far as just reaching out for help. There is just nothing wrong with it. I think about the last probably 6 or 7 startups that I have joined or advised or partnered with. It's just because I've kept in touch with people and introduced people to other people who might be interesting. Nothing might pan out, but at least you're keeping your name in their mind. And even right now, while networking might feel really weird, by all means just practice on it with friends or friends of friends, or just, hey, I think Elias was saying yesterday, just introduce me to your boss. I think people are just so willing to help one another out right now. And if that's a 5-minute call, if that's an email back and forth, if it's, hey, can you take a look at my resume and see what you think? It just goes so far. But the really key piece of this is while you're cutting your teeth and getting comfortable reaching out blindly to people. I know it's extremely hard for introverted people, especially, but while you're cutting his teeth, now you have to use it as muscle memory, right? So we're using this time to network during COVID. What we do now will not get forgotten in a year. And so helping somebody or somebody else making an introduction, that's just going to go so far into your saying, hey, this person really helped me out. I'd like to bring him into the organization. People remember that, whether you like it or not. I don't know if that really kind of summarizes the question, but
It does.
I think that it's good just to, let's just be human about this, right? And just know that it's not always comfortable for everybody.
Sure.
That's how I see it when people reach out to me.
I think there's a little bit of a follow-up to that, and then we'll let Neil and Elias jump in if they have any comments. Say that you are laid off, and you don't necessarily need anything from your network. You're going through all the steps to apply, or you're comfortable reaching out. Is there any way that you can provide value to your network if you're not working right now?
Oh, completely. It really is just helping one another out, checking in on one another. Whether you're laid off or not, we're all kind of in this together. So I can't tell you how many people I've reached out to that I've worked with 10, 15 years ago, just because now Zoom has all of a sudden made it socially normal to just talk to one another, reconnect with one another, just go and do that. But if you kind of reach out and say, hey, we worked together, I interviewed you for this role, how you doing? People remember that. And I don't know if that answers it, but it's just, yeah, but I can wrap it up there. But
Elias or Neil, any comments?
Sure. I'll quickly throw in kind of something I mentioned yesterday. I think one of the biggest pieces to doing networking, in addition to really helping your job search and maybe getting you in the door or in the back door, getting introduced to managers, is just the feeling of accomplishment that you'll get out of talking to people, especially if you can do like quick Zoom. I mean, if you have to do phone calls, it's fine, but applying can be mind numbing and sometimes just soul crushing if you never hear back. And I think if you're able to say, you know what, I'm going to do that for 3 hours today. I'm going to apply for as many jobs as I can. Then for another 3 hours, I'm going to do that just networking and see if I can set up 2 phone calls, 2 Zoom meetings. Set yourself a small goal. And if you're able to accomplish those things, you're just going to feel like you're getting things done. And you are, but it's going to feel better too than just applying over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's not. I'll sort of sum it up with two thoughts, right? I think the number one is if you're not out there virtually networking, others are, and they're gonna get those jobs.
Yep.
At the end of the day, that's just what it is. I mean, if you don't like it, I understand, but now it's more of a necessity than ever for you to step out and do it. So the question being, well, how do I even start, right, to network, where you could go back to starting with kind of the core folks that you know and want to catch up with. You could go the LinkedIn round and do the data dump and kind of prioritize. The other angle, which I think is really interesting, is consider doing projects and 1099s leading into a full-time gig, right? Great resource would be, and I encourage everybody to look at this, is TopTal. TopTal has a phenomenal platform for sourcing engineering across the board globally, and there are a lot of big companies that are coming to TopTal to source 1099s for short-term projects. And if things go well, if economy improves, I mean, that has the potential to lead to a full-time leadership gig. So something to just consider is could you use the gig economy to not just strengthen your portfolio and the work that you're doing, but also network and meet new people and collaborate on projects, and which could actually open doors into full-time opportunities faster than just a resume submission online.
Sure.
So something to just think about on how adaptive you can be right now to still be productive and get through the front door.
And there's nothing better than consulting and contract work to tell you exactly what you love, what you're great at, or what you're not, right? That's right. Short terms, you're very focused, and it kind of just really lets you know exactly where you thrive.
Yeah. Christy, you've been an internal HR person, so you've run recruiting teams.
Yep.
I think one thing that a lot of people forget is that if you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and say, hey, would you mind introducing me to the hiring manager? You feel like that person is doing you a favor. But if there's an internal referral bonus, you could actually, that person could be helping themselves, right?
Yeah, for
by
sure.
making that introduction.
Yeah, are you asking if the candidate's asking for the introduction to the hiring manager?
Yeah, if I say, hey, Christy, you haven't met me, or we've only met at a happy hour, but you have this position open at your customer. Would you introduce me to the hiring manager? Would you refer me? That could actually be helping you as well to make that referral.
It depends on how your referral program is set up, right? If you automatically get a payout upon 3 weeks or whatever, that's great. A lot of companies do take retention away from the referral person, the referring party, instead of it is on leadership and it is on the organization. But I think that there's nothing wrong with, even if you don't know anybody at the company, once you apply, go and see who you think the hiring manager is. And just reach out to them on LinkedIn and say, I applied for this role, regardless if I'm fit or not. I think you and I have some aligned interests, and I'd love to chat with you. I think without being overly invasive, I'm sure, a lot of people who are working full-time right now are completely underwater, right? And there's a lot going on, but I think you can just kindly reach out and just say, I applied. I'd love to hear more, whether I'm fit or not, or else maybe I can make an introduction to somebody who might be. By all means, recruiters are so flooded right now with resumes. We were talking yesterday about 2,500 resumes per job. That's not human. And so more and more recruiters are going to be looking for those referrals.
Thank you. We'll start with Elias here on this one. We've got kind of this built-in excuse for a gap in employment now with COVID-19 coronavirus. How far can people stretch that? What's an acceptable gap, do you think, because of this? What will people forgive when you're applying for a job with this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's, I don't know that there's a standard answer to that. I think, a few months is certainly fine. I think as long as you can explain it, and I think it might be worthwhile, and Christy, having run internal recruiting teams, maybe you can tell me what corporate recruiters, I know on the agency side, if people actually put why the gap, what was going on during that gap, it a lot of times will answer that question for you when I'm looking through a resume, or any of my recruiters look through resumes. Then they don't go, wow, this person, was out of work for 9 months. I wonder what was going on. If it just says, laid off, looking for work. Okay, now I have an answer and I can call them up. So I don't know that it's a specific amount of time that's good or bad. It's good to explain that amount of time, I think, in my experience. The thing you probably don't want to do is try to lie about the gap or somehow hide it, because generally those things will come to light at some point in the hiring process. Could be all the way to employment verification at the very end, and that's when you really don't want it to come out. I've seen a lot of people try to kind of gloss over those things. Now, maybe take the months off your resume, right? I don't think there's any recruiters who really pay much attention that if it just says 2017 to 2020, right? I don't look twice at that. I just think, okay, I'll figure out when they left their last job when I make a call to them. So that could be a way to kind of start the process, because what you need to do as a job seeker is get a conversation. You have to get past that resume look. And if you can, if leaving the months off and just putting years can make that first conversation happen, maybe that's the way you do it. And then explain it in person. If you have to put the months on, or if the gap is going to overlap too much, I'd say maybe put an explanation on the resume.
I always say, Elias, I think that if especially in the environment that we're in, if you have a red flag like that and you're applying to an ATS, you don't leave the red flag unanswered, because then you will not get a call. I mean, because, I've looked at many resumes too, and if you don't put anything, you won't get the call. And so,
Yeah.
because like Marcus asked this question, Marcus Curley, who's one of the people on the call. And so he said, like, if you don't put anything, you're not going to get the call. So you need to put something, because I'm not going to call you if you don't put anything.
Well, if there's 2,500 resumes, and let's say your ATS can weed that down to 200, right? What are you going to do to winnow that list down to a manageable call list? You're going to look for immediate things that you can rule people out on. And it's the easy stuff, right? Do I see the keywords? This job involves data center consolidation. Do I see data center consolidation? No. Is there a big gap that isn't explained? Okay, I'm just going to weed them out. It's not about saying, well, I'm going to really dig in and say which are the 10 best fits out of this 200. It's saying, like Christy said, it's not human to be able to manage a list like that. So the natural tendency is to say, what's the fastest way I can legally take this list down to a manageable amount of resumes?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want anything to be on there that's easily going to cast you aside, in my opinion, as a candidate.
Yeah. So I would agree. And so his other question was explaining a gap on your advice on explaining the gap on your resume. And then was being let go by a company. Was, from a recruiting standpoint, advice on being let go by a company. How else could you explain that on a resume?
I mean, there's no shame in it. I mean, I've been there. I think a few of us have. I'm like, and I literally have it as a line item on my resume. It was let go because of corporate restructuring. And so I don't know how much clearer I can be in what has happened and why I'm in the market. And then, the point being is, if it took me 6 months to find a job or it took me 3 months to find a job, at the end of the day, the only point that I will make is don't depend on ATSs and job boards to show you the fresh jobs. Don't. Right? You've got a network. That's got to be your first one. Your inside route to finding that ideal role and having conversations needs to start now, because then by law, that job will then show up at the ATS and job boards a month or two later, because legally HR has to interview X amount of candidates. But the conversations have already preceded that, right, for a month or two, and you want to be in that pole position to have those conversations. So especially if you're looking for leadership roles, those are the ones that you're going to have to start networking, finding now, and getting into those conversations way before you hit an ATS, just to kind of go through the process. So I wouldn't. ATSs are important, but I wouldn't depend on them as a source of truth. I would place heavy emphasis on networking already.
I've always trained my teams internally that anybody who has a gap on their resume, well, first and foremost, if you show some sort of layoff in 2020, it is my hope that nobody is judged based on what's happening this year if you shut down on somebody's resume in 2020. That's my point there. Secondly, you know, I've always trained my teams, if you see gaps, that person has a story, right? And while that seems, you know, we all wish that somebody would see our resume that way, I think it's important to say what your story is. Did you go take care of a relative? Did you go traveling? Did you go back to school? Anything like that is going to, you know, just fill up the gap instead of, hey, I played video games all day, or I went, you know, and, you know, I don't know, whatever. But that's what I'm looking for is just the story. Gaps happen, layoffs happen, firings happen, right? But as long as you can tell that in a professional way, I think that there is just absolutely nothing wrong with it on your resume.
So Elias, I think I heard what you say, and I think Christy and Neil are saying thumbs up to this. If you have a gap of more than a couple of months and you have months listed on your resume, to just go ahead and put a line item saying downsize because of corporate restructuring, or studied for an MBA, or COVID layoff.
Yeah, that's what I think. I mean, to me, those resumes sort of, again, float to the top if I can see what an explanation is. You know, it depends on the job, and it depends on how many resumes I have to look at, honestly. And that's where, again, if we're seeing these giant stacks of resumes, if you have those things explained out, I think it helps, again, tell your story without the person having to say, okay, I don't know what this person's story is, and then I've got this resume, I do know what this person's story is. Well, I'm going to gravitate to the person I don't have unanswered questions about. So more than, you know, a couple months usually isn't that big of a deal. Yeah, the honesty is great, of course. I would say when you're starting to hit like 5 to 6 months, it probably is more imperative to put in there what happened or what you've been doing. I think a lot of people take time off in between jobs a couple months, and that's not a huge deal. But I also think if you take contract work, like Neil was talking about, it's good to put which jobs were contract, especially if they're shorter. And another piece of advice that this is a little off the topic, but if you have overlapping dates when you have maybe some part-time work or side work or a company that you owned, explain why the dates overlap, because a lot of times that's something that gets you ruled out, you know, or people think, oh, this person doesn't have any attention to detail. They don't have their dates right. Well, they might be completely right, but you didn't say you had concurrent employment. So, you know, those are things that are important, I think, to make sure you touch on.
Great, thank you. Neil, in the past, you used to have to go through an ATS builder if you wanted to apply for some jobs online. Now, a lot of the ATS will let you do that, or you can upload your own resume. We're kind of asking you unfairly to be an expert in all ATS systems right now, but you know,
you've done the legwork.
Analyze yourself by uploading your own resume instead of going through the ATS builder, or using your LinkedIn profile to apply instead of going through the ATS builder, if that option is available.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just depends on how complete your LinkedIn profile is, right? So if it's, because again, we talk about rows and columns being mapped in the back end of an ATS. The LinkedIn importer is built to match those one-to-one. So as long as your LinkedIn profile is complete and represents what you want to showcase as your first foot forward, if the ATS has the option to plug in your LinkedIn and import your profile, I would highly recommend pulling that in and attaching your resume, right? So you've got two pieces that are important. I don't think there is a kind of a, you know, here's the right way of doing things. Yeah, if you feel comfortable with just letting the ATS parse your resume, again, go back to check all the fields. Make sure all the fields are filled. Make sure all your dates are correct. Make sure you have got all the text in the descriptions. It's a complete profile versus gaps. And so I think that piece is equally important. At the end of the day, I don't think there's any trickery involved in getting it through an ATS, as long as you trigger the keyword filters, then that passes you into the first round, right? That's the key. And unfortunately, this is a really sad stat, but 52% of resumes that was submitted online last year were disqualified by ATSs.
Is there a demo ATS that people could play with to test it?
I mean, these are B2B companies selling, right, SaaS software. So if they've got freemium versions that you can play with, I'm sure you could.
Is
In
there
theory,
though? Like, I mean, that you
not
know
that
of?
I know of, where a job seeker can just go in and kind of validate their profile against an ATS to get better. Not that I know of.
That was one of our questions. Thanks.
One thing I wanted to quickly interject, since you brought up LinkedIn, make sure your LinkedIn profile, at least titles and dates and companies, is identical to your resume.
Yep.
Because I can't tell you, more than one client hiring manager has just rejected people because their resume didn't match their LinkedIn profile. So nothing to do with skills, nothing to do with background experience, anything other than just those two facts. So please make sure you align those two things.
Well, and I think, Neil, you mentioned 75 different ATS companies at the beginning of the call. So even if there is a tool where you can kind of validate your resume, that may not hit all 75.
Yeah, because the algorithms all are usually are standard. The keywords are set by the HR team and the IT team, right? So, and it depends on job. They're you know, if it's an engineering role, the keywords will be different than it's a marketing role versus a sales role. So it really depends on two things. One, the level of expertise of the HR recruiter using the ATS. Right. So are they frontline talent acquisition that are a couple of years out of college and just, you know, scanning through resumes and that's it, and kind of letting the ATS do the work? Or are they experienced recruiters who know how the game works and know how to optimize keywords to source the right resumes to come through a pool of talent? So there's a lot of variables and factors. Your best chance to make it through the gate is to make sure you mirror the keywords correctly and to the point where they are exact. And so I'll give you a great example. A friend of mine just applied for a job a month ago, and he was a digital manager on his resume. He applied for a digital marketing manager at a company career website through an ATS and instantly received a rejection.
So, Christy, to that point, you know, as an internal HR person, would that get you in trouble when somebody calls to validate your job? You know, if one of your employees is doing that validation and they said, "Hey, we've got this person," and they said that they're a digital marketing manager, they're applying for this job. You know, can you give us a little idea what he did for you, what she did for you?
Oh, you mean calling the former employer or the current employer? I would recommend not doing that. You know, that could really jeopardize that person's job. I think that really crosses a very interesting line into, you know, jeopardizing integrity. Is that what you're asking?
I am. You know,
Yeah.
that between digital manager or digital marketing manager, is that big enough to make it look like the person was shifty or doing something wrong while applying for that job?
Not at all. No, that wouldn't pop up in the ATS. It would take a skilled in-house or you know, it would take a recruiter to understand the difference between digital marketing and digital management.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
One question that I think everybody liked when we talked about it earlier was a lot of people just have kept the same resume for 20 years and they just put a couple bullets from their most recent job on it and start shipping that out again. If you're laid off right now and if you've got some time, should you be looking at reinventing yourself a little bit and reworking that resume? Or if it's worked for you for the last 20 years, should you stick with it?
I can start off if you want. I mean, I would rework it. I don't think you need to completely rework it, but you know, I would say don't go beyond probably 3 pages if you can help it. You know, I get 7-page resumes, and I can tell you, I doubt that pages 4 through 7 hardly ever get looked at. But by the same token, I also get resumes where the person's most recent job was 7 years and they have 3 bullet points. And I can tell you in my mind, I'm like, you did those 3 things for 7 years? That's it? No other accomplishments, nothing else? So just adding a couple other bullet points is not going to cut it either. I mean, I think redoing the resume is certainly important. But I don't think, like we've been talking about, there's necessarily this new magical resume that, you know, is better than the resumes that we've had for a while. I think most ATS, CRM systems still look at resumes pretty much the same, right? It's title, date, company, skills and responsibilities. So the format is pretty much the same. But I think what you need to do as your time goes on, you need to shrink the old jobs, right? Those are the ones where you do need to take them down to a few salient bullet points, because no one's getting to the old jobs, and expand the new jobs to really talk about what you've done. I mean, to me, that's the most important thing. And the other thing that I've made this point a bunch too in the past, having gone through 2 downturns now, this is the 3rd. When you start a new job, immediately link into your coworkers, your manager, everybody, because I can't tell you how many times in 2004 and then again in like 2010, I had candidates who are like, oh, I can't find my previous manager. You know, I got laid off and then they got laid off and I don't have their contact info. Well, if you've linked into all these people, now you know where they are and you can generally reach them again. Plus, if you use LinkedIn to just kind of update yourself, like, oh, I just added this new skill or I just did this new project, just kind of keep it as a running tab of a resume so you don't forget all the stuff you've done over the years. So it doesn't necessarily help somebody right this minute who forgot to do all that stuff, but it is something to keep in mind the next time you start a new job.
Neil or Christy, any comments?
I mean, yes. I mean, definitely don't submit a stale resume, right? I mean, update it accordingly. You know, your recent accomplishments for sure, and just keep it straight to the point, right? It does. I have an interesting kind of follow-up question for Christy, because it really depends also on whether you're applying for a startup versus a large corporate.
Mhm.
In my experience working both, right? So large corporate, when I worked for Dell for many years, the titles were very important.
Yeah.
And not just to get in through a door, but you know, sort of being very, very focused on, well, I was a senior engineer too, or I was a blah, 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 right? And so in a large corporate setting or enterprise side, I mean, that matters. On the startup side, you know, it really depends on the startup, or in how you want to kind of preface your title and how it's being received. So I'm curious to hear, you know, Christy, you've kind of worked both sides. Like, if someone comes in with a resume that says, you know, I was the head of making things all work, right? And you know, all the fun titles that you can come up with, like, is that a door opener into a serious conversation, or would you prefer titles to be more kind of?
Yeah, I'm not, you know, I think that's a personal thing. I'm not title happy by any stretch. I think it's up to HR professionals to be able to train their in-house talent acquisition teams to understand Director 1, Director 2, you know, SVP 1, SVP, whatever that looks like, and how that translates to smaller companies and bilaterally, right? But I frankly, and this is just my personal perspective, I don't necessarily look at your title. I might look at it if you are you've been at the C level and you're applying for, you know, an individual contributor role. That might raise my eyebrows a little bit. But I think it's more along the lines of, if you really call yourself, I did all things, okay, but let's see what there is to back that up, right? Or, you know, chief bottle washer and cooker, like that, okay. That means you're humble, you know, and you really did, you roll up your sleeves and you checked your ego at the door. I don't know if that answers the question, Neil, but it really is personal preference. And I think all companies can get a little too tied to I think they can get way too tied to the title and not the experience and not the person.
Yeah, to just quickly dovetail on that, having trained lots and lots and lots of recruiters, senior recruiters who've been around, they know to look past titles. Junior recruiters, and there's plenty of them out there, corporate and agency, do not. They source on title, they look at title, they're driven by title. So you need to make sure your titles are clear, as clear as you can make them, and to the point, right? So they're not these muddy systems analysts, even though that was your title. Maybe make it a little more relevant to what you're actually doing. But if the job you're applying for is a systems analyst, perfect, leave it. But I've seen the title systems engineer actually be a technical writer, right? But because they worked at Raytheon, they were called a systems engineer. So that person would never have gotten called by a junior recruiter for a technical writer job because they were a systems engineer. So you have to be careful.
Come and play, just
right. But I have seen so many people who literally source on title. Like they will put that title in, and if they don't see that exact title, they don't even look at your resume. So you just have to be careful, because there's a lot of inexperienced recruiters out there who, rely too heavily on those pieces.
To Eliza's point earlier, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given, and I do a terrible job of following it, is that you should get yourself in the habit, and maybe it's just sending yourself a calendar invite on a monthly or quarterly basis, and sitting down and having a Word document of what did I accomplish in the last month or the last quarter? How did it impact the business? And just writing out some bullet points to yourself. And then at the end of the year, taking that document, dressing it up, giving it to your boss and say, hey, while you're looking at what we've done the last year, this is just what me and my team have done. It can really help them with the end of year reviews, especially if your boss is not an IT person. Kind of a lot of times IT is just this gray area, and people don't really know what we do. And they're frequently surprised when you hand them that document. Wow, I had no idea you guys did this much and impacted the business this much. And then when you keep those, that helps you so much when that downsizing that you weren't expecting happens and you're scrambling to come up with solid bullets for your resume. It's so hard to look back on a 7-year career and say, wow, what did I do? But if you've got those quarterly, monthly, yearly notes to yourself, it makes it so much easier to put your resume together and not do it under stress. Like I said, I'm terrible at doing it, but it's still some of the best advice I've gotten.
And whoever gave you that advice, that is freaking awesome. And I cannot tell you how excited I am to hear that, because for years I have mandated people that reported to me to maintain a project tracker on themselves, period. And I can give you guys a template. I carry it to every job I go. This is what I need you to track yourself qualitatively and quantitatively. So in our one-on-ones, we're more productive, right? Don't tell me what you're doing, show me. And so that has become so crucial because I maintain for myself. And so it becomes an easy plug and play into any resume. Say, well, over the last quarter, we did this, I did this, this was the impact, this was the value. And it's literally copy and paste, right? I don't have to rethink anything. And it's a habit that you have to generate. And it's probably because Dell is so anal when I was there, where and this is 11 years of essentially making sure that you're doing the work. But it's one of those few habits that I carry with me to this day, and I think it's going to be all the more important now.
Well, and for those of you, Sean, I absolutely love the idea too. And for those of you who are kind of maybe thinking like, oh crap, I haven't done that for the last 2 years, right? And I've just been laid off. This is like, let's dovetail back into networking. Here, now you've got something to ask some people in your network. Do you remember that project? Exactly what was the scope of that, and what did we accomplish? And that kind of goes into other really awesome things. But it's a great foundation just to reach out to your network and just say, what did you think of that? And how did we kind of change the world with that?
So we've just got a couple of moments left. I want to touch on some questions that have come in from the audience here. On the video, Neil, you mentioned keeping that so short. Because I did such a short video, do you kind of have a template that you like to, bullet points that you like to see in that?
Yeah, so on Combio itself, you can create a 360 profile that you can share with recruiters, and part of it is uploading your video, and we kind of give you guidance on what you should speak to. But you need to speak on camera about who you are versus what you've done. You're already covering what you've done on resume, right? This is more about you. This is more about why you think you would be a good fit for the company, and hopefully you've researched the company and the culture page and that side of the house, and you understand kind of the tone that's being used there. And so the intention here is you now give the reviewer, which in this case, talent acquisition or recruiter on the other side, the best chance to get to know you quickly. Try to keep your video under 60 seconds, right? Don't go kind of in a tangent, really kind of keep it succinct. Keep it tailored to the job that you're applying to. If you're applying for a sales role, sell us on why you're applying, right? If you're applying for an engineering leader role, harp on the qualitative pieces that make you a strong leader, right? And why people would want to work for you or work with you. And so I think that's it. And then at the end of the day, make it personable. We are all people, right? We're on this side, there's people looking for people. So just make it just very personal and relatable. Package it with your resume, your journey map, and then go ahead and submit it in whatever system or through email, and you stand a better chance of getting noticed versus just a kind of a simple paper resume.
And I guess that's probably similar to the resume. Don't just film it and fire it off. Film it and show it to people that you trust to look at it and get some feedback on.
Yeah, I think so.
Please show it to other people.
Yeah.
Somebody might notice like your cat is leaping in the background, or like it's just a nose up and forehead view. Your friends are going to be really honest. So definitely, same with a resume. I always say this: always let somebody else proofread your resume before you send it to the greater good. Same with video.
And then, are there any privacy concerns or ownership concerns around those videos?
Well, and I
yeah.
wanted to add to that because besides just ownership privacy, I also wanted to add, because I've been advised too about issues around having like a picture on a resume,
Yep.
around just HR issues with like even having the picture can disqualify you. So beyond just ownership privacy around like being disqualified from the I don't know what the right word I'm looking for. Elias, if you can help me, like, you know what I'm talking about
Like
with
recruiter
like,
bias?
It's recruiter bias.
Thank you. Yes. So
Yeah.
I wanted
So-
to add to that.
Yeah, so that is a massive topic that I'm happy to talk about some other time. But I think let me kind of phrase it in one sentence. Bias exists no matter what. It's there. We're human, and if you see a picture, you're inclined to be biased in some way. And I'm speaking from a recruiter or the hiring manager perspective, right? The challenge has always been, and you'll start to hear terms like diversity, equity, inclusion, and DEI and DNI, and a variety of different things, right? The challenge has always been the very HR systems, the ATSs that we're talking about today, are not designed to support diverse hiring. Right. And so they like to see things black and white. They like to see a resume without a picture. They like to see, things that are kind of clean, to try to not bring that bias in the process. The problem now is when you're getting a ton of volume, that it's virtually impossible to sort on talent. Right. So there are systems now that are out there in this impasse that are coming up in the forefront on tracking that an unintended bias through data. It's super fascinating and interesting, but it's still a long ways to go. But to your point, I think I would look at a couple of things, right? If you're applying to a large corporate that's been around for 100 years, they're probably on an old and antiquated system and a process that probably does not support a video or a profile, right? Or an image. And doesn't have the necessary training per se to even go through a kind of that bias piece, right? So for job seekers, I think you've got to do that vetting really quickly and say, should I push my package here, right? But for
Maybe
smaller or maybe not, right? But for smaller and mid-range companies, or companies that are way more progressive, they've got maybe they've got phenomenal views on Glassdoor in terms of their leadership. Look at the diversity of their board and look at things that matter. These little signals. You stand a much better chance of presenting a holistic view where the recruiter would welcome something beyond just a resume, right? So I think there's a couple of things that you, as a job seeker, you're going to have to do a little bit of homework on before you go out and sort of present your package, whether it's just the resume or these other things.
Well, I guess it's no different than the resume itself. There's no one fit for every job. So not just the bullets, it's also the format, the template, and the inclusions.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
One question came up. Would you treat the history on a resume differently if you're going after a consulting or short-term role than you would for a permanent full-time role?
Well, for me personally, I wouldn't say so. I think you just want to make sure that, again, talking about the customization piece, that you're putting in the stuff you did in those long-term roles that specifically addresses the short-term project that you want to do, right? That you're talking about those very specific bullet points that are going to accomplish that. I mean, yeah, you might want to de-emphasize budgets and high-level management stuff, but if it's a project, you keep that on there, but maybe your first 3 or 4 bullet points talk about specific projects that match. But I wouldn't make a wholesale change to the resume. I would just do the kind of basic reformatting like we talked about.
Great.
Yeah, I would just show that you're able to work in scope, and also, consulting versus full-time work is not, it is different, right? And it's not for everybody. So I think that's the only thing is, once you're on the call with the recruiter, it's just making sure that you know what you're about to step into, but specifically know that you're able to kind of work within specific parameters, and then still have, outcomes that you can sink your teeth into on the very end of the contract.
I think we're getting to a good spot to wrap up here. Elias, I'd kind of like to end on a real positive note here. So yesterday, while we were talking, you mentioned some of the trends that you're seeing in the market, and you kind of brought some positivity to the discussion about technical roles and things like that. Do you mind commenting again on some of that?
Oh, sure. I mean, the things that I'm seeing specifically, and some of these are even, software engineer managers. So it's not just developers, engineers. Still have many, many people turning down opportunities that we're reaching out to them with for a variety of reasons. They've got other opportunities. I've had people turn down offers. We've got one gentleman right now who wants a month to wait to decide because he's got another offer that he's sitting on, and then he's taking the 2 offers and he's going to actually see if there's another offer comes through. So still seeing movement. We're seeing what I'm hearing from some of the other staffing companies that I work with too and talk to. The hiring manager interviews are starting to come back up again.
Awesome. Awesome.
The competitive nature, at least on the engineering side, still seems to be on the candidate side of things rather than, on the employer side.
So
of
good
things.
to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, right? I think depending on the verticals, I'll speak specifically to the technology vertical where we sit in, right? I think companies from the FAANG companies all the way down, right, are still recruiting, especially for IT and engineering, and now recruiting remotely. And so Facebook just dropped news that they're going to move towards a work remote model for a majority of their workforce starting next year. Right. So that basically means that you don't need to be in the Bay Area anymore. Right. You can actually apply for Facebook engineering roles from anywhere. Sure, you may not be comped as being in the Bay Area, but regardless, now you've got a ton of talent you have a ton of opportunity to apply for. And I think, just do your due diligence, right? Look at the industries that will continue to grow through COVID. Right? It will be software. It will be technology. It will be healthcare. It will be all these things. And so if there's a point in time right now where you were considering a career pivot and to get into a complete new vertical with some of the same IT skill sets, I would start to focus on those industries and those companies. Look at those roles, their career pages, copy and paste that career description, their title quickly into LinkedIn to see which recruiter's working on it, friend them, and then start talking to them. Right. And get the ball rolling. So I honestly think there's a ton of silver lining coming out of this, where you now truly have a chance to have an amazing work-life balance without a commute and work for a company where you may be based thousands of miles away.
Great.
We can all get the work-life balance we've all been asking for that we never could get, and now that we want. And I mean, it's here. Maybe something good can come from this pandemic.
So Christy, Neil, and Elias, thank you so much for being so generous with your time to take these questions. If you're online and you're not connected with myself or Amy Beth, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. We have your email addresses from when you signed up. Neil, we'll be nagging you to get us the
journey map.
how do we,
Absolutely.
Yeah, how do we get
Yep.
the journey map?
I will send it over. Yep.
Can you send it over to me or Sean? And
Sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I was just trying to think, how can we, to maybe the folks that are on this call, if I was just trying to think how I can get it out to you. If you would like a copy of the journey map, I was thinking the link that I sent that's in the chat box, if you would just like a copy of the journey map, instead of being interested in SIM, if you want to fill out, I just put it in the chat again, the information on SIM. If you want to fill out the form for information on SIM and just put in the information box, just say, I just want the customer journey map. I will not send you SIM information, and I will just send you the journey map, was what I was thinking. So if you just want to put your name, your first name, last name, and your email, and just put in the box at the bottom that just want the journey map, I will just email you the journey map and will not send you information on SIM. I was thinking that would probably be the best way to get you the journey map, so that I don't bombard you all with information on SIM. I was thinking that would probably be the best way for me to get you the journey map, because I know that everybody gets far too many emails and I don't want to bombard you with that. So I just resent in the chat box the information on SIM link. But if you just want the journey map, just fill that out and just put in the box, the free form box, I just want the journey map, and I will send it to you.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Good luck
Thanks,
with your,
guys.
and if we can help, let us know.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Take care,
Oh,
guys.
shoot.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is it the wrong link? Okay. Sorry, somebody just said it was the wrong link. Shoot. It is the wrong link. Okay. If you, okay. Well, here, I'm just going to put my email right here. It's the wrong link. So why don't you guys just email me at amybethherman@gmail.com, amybethherman@gmail.com. And just tell me what you want. There you go. amybethherman@gmail.com. Let's just make it simple. Email me and tell me if you want information on SIM, and tell me if you want the customer journey map. Let's just make it simple. amybethherman@gmail.com. Tell me if you want info on SIM, or tell me if you want the customer journey map. There you go. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Bye.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.